Wow, that was a lot of content to cover. I hope it was helpful for you. I want you to just take a quick moment and give yourself a nice pat on the back for making it through that tutorial series, because there's a lot of content that was shared in there, a lot of steps to go through, a lot of homework to work on. And the fact that you're here watching this video means that you care a lot about self-developing yourself and growing yourself and getting your voice out there. So just congratulate yourself on making it through this tutorial series and doing something that was focused on your self-development and growing your mission. All right, this concludes the video series on how to approach starting a podcast. I'm sure there's things that I missed, and based on that, and as they come to mind, I will create extra videos and tack them on at the end. If there's anything specific that you wish that I would dive into more, or that you feel like I missed that you want me to talk about, leave me a comment in this video and I'll be reading all those comments, and I can create future videos and tack them onto this tutorial series based on the requests from you. So anything that comes to mind from me, anything that comes to mind for you, let me know in the comments, and I can create more tutorials, more content in this series to help you launch your podcast successfully. Because this is a ton of content in such a short time, I'm just going to summarize what we talked about really quickly. First of all, you decided that you wanted to start a podcast, and that's what brought you here. Then you made a minimum plan to launching your podcast. We clearly defined all of the whys that you have associated with your podcast. Then we talked about the episode flow and coming up with a questionnaire. We talked about the title, the description, the artwork. We talked about the essential hardware that you need for podcasting. We talked about the essential software that you need for podcasting. We talked about creating an introduction episode before you have your pillar content episodes. We talked about preparing for launching your podcast, and we talked about launching your podcast. So in my opinion, that's a bulk of what you need to know in regards to launching your podcast. I hope this content was valuable for you, and I hope that you launch your podcast soon. All of this should be achievable and doable over a weekend with maybe a week or two to get the content that you need. So don't overthink it. Don't spend too much time on any step. Just get your podcast launched and then tweak it as you go. Before I let you go, I want to just give you a quick overview of my podcast journey so you can see sort of what I went through, and maybe it can help shortcut some of your learnings through the process. So I'm going to share my screen with you and just sort of walk you through how the beginning went for me and up to where I am today. Just really quickly, a quick summary. If you want to see this deeper dove into a full video, then let me know in the comments if this was valuable, and I can dive deeper into it. I can show you my analytics, but right now I'm just going to do a very quick overview of my journey. All right, so here I am at the beginning of my podcast journey. I've got my first episode 0, and on this episode, I had a friend interview me for my podcast. And what I did to create this video is I actually spent like an entire day just recording the episode 0 of me sharing my stories. And at the end of it, I was very unhappy with the end product. I felt like I was a robot. I felt like there was no gaps in between me talking because I was so picky with editing, and it just did not flow. So after that, I decided to get a friend to interview me so it can be more organic. So that's what I did. I spent a ton of time diving into my story, creating a solo episode on my own, and then I just scratched it, got a friend to interview me, and it's so much easier. So if I could go back and change something in regards to how I treated my first episode, I would have just approached it right off the bat with having a friend interview me on my journey and why I'm doing the podcast, and have the certain questions lined up. The first interview that I did was with my sister, so it was a little bit of a lower barrier of a guest. And we actually did a practice run before we did the full one. So I did a test interview with her with the questionnaire that I came up with. And then later I did another interview with her, which is the more final interview. That allowed me to do like a one practice run with the questionnaire with someone who actually has answers to those questions. And then a second run to do like the actual interview that we'll be sharing. And also another thing that I did is these are all audio only interviews. And the first 3 interviews that I did, the first 3 guests that I had, I gave myself permission to re-record myself every time I spoke, because I was not very good at interviewing back then. So I'd literally ask a question, get the answer, ask a question, get the answer, ask a question, get the answer. So in post-editing, I could see where I asked the questions. So I would just go in there, re-ask that question in post-editing where I'm more confident and concise, and then insert that in so that I could be clearer and more confident in those first episodes. And that was a good practice for me because I noticed ways that I was speaking and ways that I could improve how I spoke. So it was a good practice for me. If you're really uncomfortable putting your voice out there, then I would consider giving yourself permission to post-edit yourself in a couple episodes, but don't do it long-term. It's a lot of work, and I don't suggest allowing yourself to do it long-term. You got to eventually overcome those barriers, become vulnerable, and move on. So I did it for the first 3. So here's the next one. I had a couple guests here, but one of my early guests, this is before my podcast launch, because remember I said I had 7 interviews that were recorded before launching my podcast. So all of these were recorded before I even had a podcast. And this Philip Scott, he's got a YouTube channel with over 1 million subscribers. I found him because I went to a podcast conference and there was a YouTube panel. So I approached the YouTube panelists and asked them if they would be a guest on my show. He agreed, and luckily I got like a really big guest early on in my podcast journey. So don't be afraid to ask for really big guests as your early guests. I mean, everybody loves talking about themselves, and if you approach it the right way, you can get some big guests early on. Don't feel like you have to slowly ease your way into it. The worst thing that can happen is that people say no. But if you don't ask, you don't know if they're going to say yes or no. So just don't be afraid to ask for getting some big guests, because I had no podcast. I had no interview experience. I had no reason to be able to get a guest of that caliber on my show. But I did, and I got it. And it was helpful to be later on say, hey, I've got a YouTuber with over 1 million subscribers. And now I've had multiple YouTubers and multiple influencers on other platforms that have over 1 million followers, because I'm able to say, hey, I've had this guest or I've had that guest on the show. Something else I did is I created update episodes. After every 10 interviews, I had my friend interview me on how my journey was going. So what have I learned so far in my podcast journey? What do I wish I had done differently? What am I changing? What am I tweaking through the process? How am I changing things moving forward? I did an update after every 10 interviews. So I've got an update here after 10. As you can see, I've got Ed Bullion. He had about 850,000 subscribers on YouTube at the time. He's over 1 million subscribers now. So if we go to after 20 episodes, yeah, you can see I did another episode after 20 interviews. And I should have, after 30 interviews, I did a live stream episode. So I had a friend who challenged me to be on camera after 30 interviews, because this is all part of my sharing journey. As you can hear, I was very uncomfortable early on. I post-edited myself every time I spoke, to now doing a live stream interview on episode 30. And then after episode 30, all of my interviews have been live stream interviewed. So I started with Zoom as my interview platform, because it gives you 2 separate audio tracks and it syncs with Calendly. So important for audio-only podcast and efficient workflows. And then after that, I'm using StreamYard because it's helpful with streaming to multiple platforms and bringing comments and engaging with people live. So now I'm doing all live stream interviews with my guests. I hope this video series was helpful for you. I hope hearing my story and my journey is helpful for you. If you want to learn more about my journey, I've got those update episodes. If you're looking to start a podcast, I think those can have a lot of value for you to listen to. And I've interviewed a lot of podcasters on my podcast. So if you're looking for tips and tricks on what new podcasters should be thinking about, maybe doing a filter on my website for podcast guests and listening to a few of those, it might be helpful for you. The main thing here is just start your podcast, get everything together, do the minimum you need to get it to live, and then you can tweak things as you go. You can change the softwares you use, you can change the hardware you're using, you can change the questionnaire that you're using, you can change everything as you go. You can change the name of the podcast, the artwork of the podcast. Everything can be evolving over time. The main thing is to get started, be consistent with it, keep sharing, keep creating, and it'll evolve over time. If you're still here listening, then I think that it's because this tutorial series was valuable to you. And if it was valuable to you, my one ask is going to be, please leave me an Apple Podcast review for my podcast. I'll leave a link in the description, but those Apple Podcast reviews are really important for growing my podcast. And it's important to any podcast to grow. So if you got a lot out of this was all free. If you can just take a moment to go to Apple Podcasts, leave me a review. That would mean the world to me. Again, let me know in the comments if there's anything else that I missed that you want to see more videos of, and thanks for tuning in.